Racist judge sentences black mother to 125 years, unaware her father is the mayor. The mahogany gavel struck with a thunderous crack that echoed through courtroom 7B, but Miss Taylor barely heard it over the rushing in her ears. Her trembling fingers gripped the edge of the defendant's table, its polished wood surface cool against her damp palms. Judge Stevens' voice boomed through the stuffy air, each word hammering another nail into her future. Hereby sentenced to 125 years. The courtroom erupted in gasps and muffled sobs, but Miss Taylor remained frozen, her throat constricting as she struggled to breathe. This couldn't be happening, not to her, not to a mother whose only crime was trying to protect her son. Through tear-blurred vision, she caught a glimpse of her father, Mayor Johnson, his face tight with barely contained fury as he stood among the spectators. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his usually composed features, highlighting the helplessness in his eyes. At that moment, Miss Taylor realized this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person of color who had faced Judge Stevens' particular brand of justice, and something had to change. Before the gavel fell and her world imploded, Olivia Taylor had been the picture of a dedicated single mother making it work against the odds. At 34, she balanced her job as a pediatric nurse at Memorial Hospital with raising her 8-year-old son Daniel, her schedule a carefully orchestrated dance of 12-hour shifts and parent-teacher conferences. Her colleagues knew her as the nurse who could calm even the most distressed child with her gentle touch and warm smile, while her neighbors on Cedar Street saw her as the woman who somehow found time to organize the community's annual back-to-school drive despite her grueling schedule. Living in her childhood home, a modest 2-story colonial that had seen better days, Olivia took pride in maintaining the property her grandparents had worked so hard to own. The peeling paint and creaky porch steps didn't matter. It was where Daniel took his first steps, where she taught him to read, and where they spent Sunday afternoons tending to her grandmother's rose garden. Her father, now serving his second term as mayor, had offered to help her buy something newer, but Olivia insisted on making it on her own. That independence, instilled by her late mother, defined everything she did. Daniel was her world, a bright-eyed boy who inherited her determination and his grandfather's sense of justice. When she wasn't working, their life fell into a comfortable rhythm: homework at the kitchen table, weekend trips to the library, and impromptu dance parties while making dinner. She taught him to stand up for what's right, to be proud of his heritage, and to work twice as hard because the world wouldn't always be fair. What she couldn't teach him was why some people would always see his skin color before they saw his brilliant mind or kind heart. That reality crashed into their carefully constructed world one autumn afternoon when the school called. Daniel had defended a smaller student from bullies, but somehow he was the one facing suspension. The familiar knot of anxiety and anger tightened in Olivia's chest as she left work early, her scrubs still wrinkled from a busy shift. She didn't know it then, but that drive to the school would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter their peaceful existence and force her to confront the very system she had always tried to work within. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Elementary's front office hummed overhead as Olivia waited, her nurse's badge still clipped to her wrinkled scrubs. Through the glass partition, she could see Daniel sitting alone in the principal's office, his shoulders slumped, hands folded in his lap just as she'd taught him. The secretary's fingers clacked against her keyboard, the sound sharp and irritating in the tense silence. "Mrs. Henderson will see you now," the secretary announced, not bothering to look up from her computer screen. Olivia bit back a correction about her marital status. It wasn't worth the effort, not today. Principal Henderson sat behind her massive desk, her steel-gray hair pulled into a severe bun that matched her expression. Daniel's chair seemed deliberately lower, forcing him to look up at the authority figure before him. 2 other adults flanked the principal, Officer James Roberts, the school resource officer, and Ms. Parker, Daniel's teacher. The power dynamic was immediately clear: 4 adults, including a uniformed officer, against one 8-year-old boy and his mother. "Ms. Taylor," Principal Henderson began, her tone clipped, "I assume you understand the seriousness of this situation." She shuffled some papers on her desk, a show of bureaucratic importance. "Daniel physically assaulted another student today." "That's not true!" Daniel burst out, his voice trembling. Tommy and his friends were pushing Marcus around, calling him names. I just pulled Tommy away. Daniel, Officer Roberts cut in, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. We don't interrupt adults when they're speaking. The gesture wasn't lost on Olivia, a subtle reminder of authority, of power, of threat. Olivia placed a steadying hand on Daniel's shoulder. Let's back up a moment, she said, keeping her voice professionally calm, the same tone she used with anxious parents at the hospital. You're saying my son assaulted someone, but from what I'm hearing, he was defending another student from bullies. Isn't that what we teach our children to do? To stand up for what's right? Ms. Parker shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but Principal Henderson's expression hardened. What we're saying, Ms. Taylor, is that your son's behavior shows a concerning pattern of aggression. This isn't the first time he's been involved in incidents. Incidents? Olivia repeated, her grip tightening slightly on Daniel's shoulder. You mean like last month when he spoke up about Tommy using racial slurs? Or last week, when he reported that Marcus was being excluded from group activities because of his disability? Officer Roberts stepped forward, his badge catching the fluorescent light. Ms. Taylor, your tone is becoming confrontational. Perhaps we should discuss this without Daniel present. The implied threat in his voice made Olivia's heart race, but she held her ground. My tone, Officer Roberts, is that of a concerned parent trying to understand why my son is being punished for doing exactly what the anti-bullying posters in your hallway encourage students to do. Principal Henderson's lips pressed into a thin line. Ms. Taylor, if you continue to be uncooperative, we will have no choice but to. A commotion in the hallway cut her off. Through the office window, Olivia could see Tommy's parents arriving, Mr. Anders. Wilson, both lawyers, dressed in expensive suits that screamed of privilege and power. Mrs. Wilson's voice carried through the door. This is unacceptable. That boy has been nothing but trouble since he enrolled here. Olivia felt Daniel tense beneath her hand. She knew that look in his eyes, the same one she saw in the mirror every time she had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. 8 years old, and he already understood the weight of being judged by the color of his skin. I want to file a formal complaint, Mrs. Wilson announced as she burst into the office, her husband close behind. That boy attacked our son. We want him expelled, and we'll be pressing charges. The room erupted into chaos. Officer Roberts moved closer, his hands still on his weapon. Principal Henderson began pulling out more forms. Ms. Parker looked like she wanted to disappear entirely. And through it all, Olivia could feel the system closing in around them, could see the story being written before anyone had heard the truth. In that moment, standing in an office where every face of authority was white and hostile, Olivia made a decision that would change everything. She reached for her phone. If we're pressing charges, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, then I'll be calling my father. I'm sure the mayor would be very interested in how his grandson is being treated, and why the school's anti-bullying policies seem to only apply to certain students. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Principal Henderson's eyes narrowed, Officer Roberts' jaw clenched, and the Wilsons exchanged worried glances. In standing up for her son, Olivia had just challenged the entire power structure of Riverside Elementary, and she was about to learn exactly how far they would go to maintain their authority. The fallout from the school confrontation spread like wildfire through their small community. By nightfall, Olivia's phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned neighbors and fellow parents. Marcus's mother, Sarah Chin, called in tears, apologizing for not speaking up sooner about the ongoing bullying her son had faced. I was afraid of making things worse, she confessed, her voice breaking. But Daniel was the only one brave enough to stand up for him. Olivia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, incident reports, school policies, and the business card of a civil rights attorney her father had recommended. Daniel was finally asleep upstairs, exhausted from the day's events, but she couldn't rest. The words on the school's incident report blurred before her eyes. Demonstrated aggressive behavior, resisted authority, and history of disruptive conduct. Every phrase seemed carefully chosen to paint her son as the aggressor rather than the protector he tried to be. A knock at the back door startled her. Through the window, she saw Angela Washington, her next-door neighbor, and a veteran teacher at another local school. Angela's face was drawn with concern as Olivia let her in. "Girl, I just heard what happened," Angela said, setting down a container of her famous sweet potato pie. "My cousin works in the district office. They're trying to make an example of Daniel. The Wilsons have been pushing for stricter discipline policies all year, and they're using this to prove their point." Olivia's hands clenched around her coffee mug. "They're targeting an 8-year-old to push their agenda? It's worse than that," Angela continued, lowering her voice. "Officer Roberts has already filed his report. He's claiming you were belligerent and threatening during the meeting. They're building a case, Olivia." The mug nearly slipped from Olivia's hands. "Threatening? I'm a pediatric nurse who was advocating for her child. You're a black woman who challenged their authority," Angela corrected gently. "And your father being the mayor makes them even more determined to put you in your place." The next morning brought more complications. Olivia arrived at the hospital to find her supervisor, Dr. Matthews, waiting with an HR representative. The conversation was brief but devastating. She was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into a complaint about her emotional stability and professional conduct. "This is ridiculous," Olivia protested, her voice echoing in the sterile conference room. "I've been here for 10 years. My patient reviews are excellent. This is retaliation." "Ms. Taylor," the HR representative interrupted, "the hospital has to take these matters seriously. Officer Roberts' report raises concerns about potential anger management issues. We have a duty to our patients." As she cleaned out her locker, Olivia's colleagues watched from a distance, their expressions a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Only Maria, a fellow nurse who had mentored her since she was a student, dared to approach. "This isn't right," Maria whispered, pressing a piece of paper into Olivia's hand. "I'm part of the nurses' union. Call this number. We'll fight this with you." But the day's challenges weren't over. When Olivia arrived to pick up Daniel from his grandmother's house, she found him sitting on the porch, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Inside, her stepmother Janet explained that several parents had called to uninvite Daniel from upcoming birthday parties and playdates. "They're treating him like he's dangerous." Janet fumed, her usually calm demeanor cracking. "These are kids he's known since kindergarten." That evening, as Olivia helped Daniel with his homework, a police cruiser drove slowly past their house for the third time. Daniel's pencil stilled over his math problems. "Mom," he whispered, "are we in trouble?" The question broke her heart. "No, baby," she assured him, though her fear churned in her stomach. "We're not in trouble. We're just fighting for what's right, remember?" But the system seemed determined to prove her wrong. The next day, she received notice of an emergency school board hearing to discuss Daniel's pattern of behavioral issues. The Wilsons had rallied other influential parents to their cause, forming a committee concerned about school safety and discipline. Mayor Johnson called an emergency meeting with his advisors, including Marcus Young, a prominent civil rights attorney who had grown up in their neighborhood. "They're trying to make this bigger than Daniel," Marcus explained, spreading documents across the mayor's desk. "The Wilsons and their friends have been pushing for more police presence in schools and stricter disciplinary policies. They're using this incident to justify their agenda." "But can they do this?" Olivia asked, studying the school board's proposed policy changes. "These measures would disproportionately affect minority students." "That's exactly the point," Marcus replied grimly. "And they're counting on most parents being too afraid to fight back." The pressure continued to mount. Anonymous letters appeared in neighboring mailboxes, warning about dangerous elements in their community. The local paper ran an opinion piece about maintaining educational standards and traditional values in schools, coded language that made Olivia's blood boil. Support came from unexpected places. Marcus's classmates began wearing homemade buttons that read, "Stand up for what's right," to school. Sarah Chen organized a group of parents to speak at the school board hearing. The nurses' union filed a formal protest against Olivia's suspension. But for every ally who stepped forward, the opposition seemed to grow stronger. The Wilsons hired a high-profile attorney known for defending police officers accused of misconduct. Officer Roberts began parking his patrol car outside Olivia's house during his off-duty hours, a clear intimidation tactic that left Daniel afraid to play in his yard. The situation reached a breaking point when Olivia discovered that someone had spray-painted a racial slur across her garage door. As she scrubbed at the hateful words, tears mixing with soapy water, Daniel watched from the kitchen window. The sight of her son's face, still innocent but now shadowed with worry, stirred something deep within her. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus Young's number. "I won't let them win," she declared, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "If they want to use my son to push their racist agenda, they'd better be ready for a fight." "You understand what that means?" Marcus asked carefully. "They'll dig into everything, your past, your family, your job. They'll try to destroy you to protect their power." Olivia looked at Daniel's school photo on the wall, at his bright smile and hopeful eyes. "They're already trying to destroy my son's future," she replied. "At least this way, we're fighting back." The school board hearing was set for a Wednesday evening, but the bomb dropped Tuesday morning. Olivia's father called just as she was making Daniel's breakfast, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They're saying you assaulted Officer Roberts during the school meeting," Mayor Johnson said without preamble. "There's a warrant for your arrest." The spatula clattered from Olivia's hand, making Daniel jump. "That's impossible. There were witnesses. The Wilson statement claims you made aggressive movements toward the officer. Principal Henderson and Ms. Parker are backing their story." Her father's disgust was palpable. "They're turning a parent-teacher conference into a felony charge." Olivia's knees went weak. She gripped the kitchen counter, her mind racing. "What about the security cameras? The office has conveniently malfunctioning that day, according to the school's maintenance records." There was a rustling of papers on his end. "Marcus is already working on it, but Olivia, they're coming for you this morning. They want to make a show of it." As if on cue, red and blue lights began flashing through her kitchen window. Daniel's spoon froze halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide with fear. "Mommy? Go upstairs to your room, baby," Olivia managed, her throat tight. "Right now. Lock the door and don't come out until Grandpa gets here." She barely had time to call Janet to come get Daniel before her front door burst open. Officer Roberts led the team, his face twisted with smug satisfaction as he read her rights. The handcuffs bit into her wrists, tighter than necessary, she noted with detached professionalism, tight enough to leave bruises that would document his petty cruelty. They paraded her down her front walkway in her breakfast-making clothes, faded pajama pants, Daniel's old science camp t-shirt, and bedroom slippers. Neighbors peered from behind curtains as police cruisers lined her quiet street. From upstairs, she heard Daniel crying. The processing at the station was deliberately slow, designed to humiliate. They made her change into an orange jumpsuit 2 sizes too large, took her fingerprints 3 times claiming technical issues, and left her in a holding cell until well past noon before letting her make her phone call. Marcus Young arrived like an avenging angel in an immaculate suit, his briefcase bulging with documents. "They miscalculated," he told her in the interview room, spreading papers across the metal table. "We've got signed statements from 3 parents who were in the office that day. Plus, Sarah Chen's son Marcus made an audio recording of the entire meeting on his tablet." Olivia's head snapped up. "What?" "Marcus has been recording his bullies for weeks, documenting the harassment. He caught everything, including Officer Roberts threatening you with his hand on his weapon." Marcus's smile was fierce. "The Wilsons didn't know that when they concocted their little story. But the revelation came with its complications. If we use that recording," Olivia realized, "Marcus becomes a target too. Sarah already thought of that. She's filing her lawsuit against the school district for failing to protect her son from documented harassment. She says it's time to stop hiding." As they strategized, another bomb dropped. Angela Washington burst into the interview room, ignoring the protesting guards. "They suspended Daniel," she announced, brandishing her phone. "Emergency expulsion, claiming he's a threat to school safety. They didn't even wait for the hearing." Olivia surged to her feet, the chains on her handcuffs rattling. "They can't do that. He's 8 years old. They're claiming it's standard procedure when a parent is charged with assaulting school staff." Angela's voice dripped with disgust. "But here's what they don't know, I've been keeping records. Every disciplinary action, every suspension, every emergency measure. The racial bias in their patterns is obvious, and I've got the data to prove it." Marcus quickly added Angela's documents to his growing arsenal. "This is bigger than they realized. They thought they could isolate you and make you an example. Instead, they're exposing decades of systematic discrimination." But victory wouldn't come easily. That evening, as Olivia sat in her cell waiting for bail to be processed, she learned that the hospital had officially terminated her employment. The local news ran a piece about growing concerns over school safety, featuring interviews with carefully selected parents, all white, all calling for stricter discipline policies. The Wilsons' high-profile attorney held a press conference on the courthouse steps, painting Olivia as an unstable element in their peaceful community. Through it all, Daniel's voice on the phone kept her grounded. "I told Marcus's mom what happened," he said proudly. "She said I was brave like you." Olivia pressed her forehead against the cold cinderblock wall, trying to hold back tears. "Baby, I'm so sorry you're dealing with all this." "Don't be sorry, Mom. You always said we have to stand up for what's right." There was a rustling sound then. "Grandpa wants to talk to you." Mayor Johnson's voice was grim but determined. "The truth is coming out, sweetheart. The nurses' union is raising hell about your termination. The NAACP is involved. 3 other families have come forward with similar experiences at the school. Even some of the Wilsons' former clients are speaking up about their discriminatory practices." "But will it be enough?" Olivia asked, watching shadows lengthen across her cell floor. "They're still in power. They're still hurting children." "Maybe," her father replied. "But for the first time, everyone's watching. Sometimes that's what it takes, one person brave enough to stand up, to show others they don't have to be afraid anymore." Later that night, alone in her cell, Olivia reflected on how quickly life could change. 2 weeks ago, she had been a respected nurse, a dedicated mother, and a quiet member of her community. Now she was a symbol, a catalyst, a threat to the very power structures she had always tried to work within. The charges against her were serious. If convicted, she faced years in prison. Daniel could end up in the system she had fought so hard to protect him from. Everything she had worked for could be destroyed. But as she traced her fingers over the bruises Officer Roberts' handcuffs had left, she remembered Daniel's words. "You always said we have to stand up for what's right." Perhaps that was worth any price they made her pay. The morning of the hearing arrived with a sense of foreboding. Olivia stood in her bedroom, hands trembling slightly as she buttoned her most professional blazer, navy blue, pressed to perfection, armor against what was to come. Her bail conditions had barely allowed her to be here. The ankle monitor beneath her dress pants served as a constant reminder of her precarious freedom. A soft knock at her door revealed Daniel, already dressed in his Sunday best, his tie slightly crooked. Without a word, she knelt to fix it, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair. In that quiet moment, mother and son shared a look of understanding beyond his 8 years. "Whatever happens today," she whispered, smoothing his collar, "I want you to remember that you did the right thing. Standing up for Marcus was brave and good." "I know, Mom." His small hands found hers. "And you did the right thing too." The courthouse steps were a battlefield of competing crowds. On one side, supporters wearing "Justice for Miss Taylor" buttons and carrying signs about educational equality. On the other, a smaller but vocal group of concerned parents, led by the Wilsons, their matching designer outfits a stark contrast to the working-class families who had come to stand with Olivia. Marcus Young met them at the side entrance, his expression grave. "There's been a development," he said, ushering them into a conference room. "Judge Stevens specifically requested to oversee this hearing." Olivia's heart sank. Stevens was notorious for his harsh sentences against people of color. His tough on crime stance a thinly veiled excuse for judicial racism. The Wilsons must have pulled strings to get him assigned. "That's not all," Marcus continued, spreading documents across the table. "They're trying to exclude Angela's statistical evidence and Marcus's recording. They filed last-minute motions claiming the data is irrelevant, and the recording was obtained illegally." Mayor Johnson burst into the room, his tie askew. "The press is everywhere. The Wilsons just gave an interview painting themselves as victims of harassment. They're claiming our supporters are creating an atmosphere of intimidation." A knock at the door made them all jump. Janet poked her head in. "Olivia, Sarah, she needs to speak with you. It's urgent." Sarah entered, clutching her tablet, her face pale. "They got to Marcus last night," she said without preamble. "2 officers showed up at our house, told him he could be charged with wiretapping, that he'd end up in juvenile detention. He's terrified." Olivia felt the walls closing in. Without the recording, it was her word against the entire school administration. Against Officer Roberts. Against a system designed to protect itself. "We've got 10 minutes, Marcus announced, checking his watch. "We need to decide, do we risk using the recording anyway? The publicity might protect Marcus, but if we're wrong..." The weight of the decision pressed down on Olivia. She looked at Daniel, remembering his tears when the police came, and his courage in telling the truth despite the consequences. Then she thought of Marcus, another child being taught that justice wasn't meant for people who look like him. A commotion outside drew them to the window. More supporters had arrived, nurses from the hospital in their scrubs, teachers from other schools, and families from the neighborhood. They carried signs reading, "Our children deserve better," and "End the school-to-prison pipeline." The sight brought tears to Olivia's eyes. "Mom?" Daniel tugged at her sleeve, pointing across the street. Through the crowd, she spotted Tommy Wilson, looking uncomfortable in a suit that matched his father's. But what caught her attention was his expression as he watched the protesters, not anger or fear, but something like recognition. "He wants to tell the truth," Daniel said quietly. "He told Marcus he was sorry, but his parents won't let him take back his statement." Before Olivia could respond, the bailiff appeared at the door. "They're ready for you." As they gathered their materials, Marcus touched Olivia's arm. "One last thing. If Stevens allows the recording, the Wilsons' attorney will try to paint you as the orchestrator, claiming you manipulated children to spy on school officials. They'll say it proves you're a threat." Olivia squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of her ankle monitor, the eyes of her community, the future of children like Daniel and Marcus resting on what happened next. "Then let them," she said, her voice steady. "Because those children deserve someone willing to fight for them." Together, they walked toward the courtroom, where Judge Stevens waited to deliver his particular brand of justice. The heavy doors opened, and Olivia felt Daniel's hand slip into hers, small but strong, trusting her to show him that sometimes standing up for what's right meant standing up to the whole world. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Stevens peered down from his bench, his steel-rimmed glasses catching the fluorescent light. The Wilsons sat with their attorney, perfectly coiffed and confident. Officer Roberts stood near the bailiff, hand resting habitually on his weapon. But it was Tommy Wilson who caught everyone's attention when he suddenly bolted up from his seat. "I need to say something," he blurted out, his voice cracking. "I need to tell the truth." "Tommy, sit down," Mrs. Wilson hissed, reaching for her son, but he dodged her grasp. "Daniel didn't hurt me," Tommy continued, tears streaming down his face. "I was the one bullying Marcus. Daniel just pulled me away. Officer Roberts is lying, and so is Principal Henderson. They made me lie too, but I can't anymore. I can't." The courtroom erupted. Judge Stevens banged his gavel as the Wilsons' attorney tried to silence Tommy. But Marcus Young was already on his feet. "Your Honor, given this testimony and the evidence we've gathered, including statistical proof of discriminatory practices and an audio recording of the incident. We move to dismiss all charges against Ms. Taylor immediately." Judge Stevens's face darkened. "Mr. Young, this court will not be swayed by the emotional outburst of a child." "Then perhaps," Mayor Johnson's voice boomed from the gallery, "the court would be swayed by the Justice Department's investigation into pattern and practice violations in our school system? Their representatives are very interested in Judge Stevens's sentencing records, particularly regarding minorities." The mayor stood, holding up his phone. "They're on hold right now, waiting to hear how this plays out." Stevens's face went from red to purple as he realized the trap. If he proceeded with his planned harsh sentence, he would draw federal scrutiny. If he dismissed the charges, he would admit his bias. Either way, his carefully constructed power was crumbling. In that moment of hesitation, Sarah Chin stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Your Honor, my son's recording is already uploaded to multiple secure locations. The truth will come out, one way or another. The only question is whether this court will be on the right side of history." Judge Stevens looked around the courtroom, seeing not just Olivia Taylor and her son, but a united community standing against injustice. His gavel hung suspended in the air for a long moment before he spoke through gritted teeth. "In light of new evidence, this court has no choice but to dismiss all charges against Ms. Taylor. Furthermore," he added, clearly forcing out each word, "I am recusing myself from any further cases involving Riverside Elementary pending review." The gallery erupted in cheers. Daniel threw his arms around his mother as Tommy Wilson ran to them, apologizing through tears. Officer Roberts stormed out, followed by Principal Henderson. The Wilsons sat in stunned silence, their power play unraveling in front of the entire community. But for Olivia, the sweetest victory was in Daniel's whispered words. "You did it, Mom. You showed them that standing up for what's right really matters." 3 months later, Olivia sat on her front porch swing, watching Daniel and Marcus play basketball in the driveway. The sound of their laughter mixed with the gentle creaking of the swing's chains was a peaceful counterpoint to the tumultuous events of the spring. The changes at Riverside Elementary had been swift and far-reaching. Principal Henderson had resigned, replaced by Dr. Angela Washington, who immediately implemented new anti-discrimination policies. Officer Roberts had been reassigned to desk duty pending review, and the school board had voted to remove police officers from elementary schools entirely. The hospital had not only reinstated Olivia with back pay but had promoted her to head nurse of the pediatric unit, acknowledging that her advocacy for children extended beyond hospital walls. The Wilsons had quietly moved to another district, but Tommy still came around sometimes, slowly learning what real friendship looked like under Daniel's patient guidance. Sarah Chin led the newly formed Parent Equity Council, working to ensure that no other child would face discrimination and silence. The Justice Department's investigation had expanded to other districts, sparking a regional conversation about disciplinary practices in schools. "How's the policy paper coming along?" Janet asked, bringing out a pitcher of lemonade. She nodded toward the laptop where Olivia had been documenting their experience, turning it into a roadmap for other communities facing similar battles. "Almost finished," Olivia replied, smiling as she watched Daniel help Marcus up after a stumble. "The ACLU wants to use it in their national campaign against the school-to-prison pipeline." The afternoon sun caught her father's mayoral campaign poster in the window. "Leadership for all." His reputation had only grown stronger after standing with his daughter against injustice, proving that true leadership meant fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult. As Olivia poured the lemonade, she reflected on how their struggle had transformed into something larger, a reminder that change was possible when people found the courage to stand together. The bruises from Officer Roberts's handcuffs had faded, but the lessons remained. Justice wasn't just about winning in court. It was about changing hearts, challenging systems, and showing children like Daniel that their voices mattered. "Mom!" Daniel called out, grinning. "Watch this shot!" The basketball arced through the air, a perfect trajectory toward the hoop. Olivia held her breath, remembering another moment of suspense not so long ago. But this time, as the ball swished through the net, She knew with certainty that they had all scored a victory far more important than any game. Did you catch all the pivotal moments that led to Olivia's victory? From Daniel's brave stand to Tommy's truthful confession, this story shows how small actions create big changes. Tell us your favorite moment in the comments, and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs inspiration to stand up for what's right. What would you have done in Olivia's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and join our discussion about systemic bias in education. Your voice matters in this crucial conversation. Connect with other readers passionate about educational equity, and learn how you can make a difference in your community.